First of all, most of you guys have been with one of my sessions, right? Everyone, just assume so do other things. Which is the Q&A a lot, I hope, or maybe the Q without the A. But mentioning that China is interesting because persons look for, often want to see some evidence, of God in the world. And I think the biggest, frankly, in my opinion, the major marker of God in the world is Israel, the state and the people of Israel. The Torah says it point blank. And an example of that might be that when the Chinese had what was called the Cultural Revolution, it was more like a cultural disaster, I don't speak Chinese except for maybe counting to 5 or 10 and saying yes and no, and knowing the symbol for the men's room. That's very, very useful. The symbol for the men's room. Which is actually a symbol of a rice paddy, which is a square with a cross in it, and then like a sword above it, meaning a person that conquers the rice paddy. Man, because it might actually mean a buffalo also. So China had its Cultural Revolution, and it essentially destroyed the cultural aspect of China, and when they wanted to rebuild, I may have mentioned this once before, but I think it's highly significant. When China wanted to rebuild its technological base, it wasn't just fisheries or other more subtle things that were involved, but that was the superficial, that was the surface that they implied the beginning. So they had to bring in foreign experts from around the world. And what was bizarre, the country that they turned to for their first foreign expert, it's bizarre, they turned to Israel. That's 1981. China doesn't have relations with Israel for another 10 years after that. But they still turn to Israel. I mean, if you look at I think Rabbi Berger pointed out one time, if you look at the population of China, I don't know what it is, 1 or 2 billion, plus or minus 300 million, and their plus or minus is like 10 times all people of Israel, Yisrael. We're lost in the scatter there. But they turned to Israel for the first person to be brought in. The UN was paying the bill because they had no foreign currency, to restart their technological engines. It was amazing. It was me. I was the person that was asked to come in. It doesn't make sense. We're a tiny country. There are lots of people in America that have not exactly my background, but a similar type of background, and still they came. The people of Israel have this glow about them for some reason that we know that the reason is obviously divine, but besides that, it's interesting that even the Chinese turn to us for the beginning of their revamping, which is, if you want to see the hand of God in the world, it just seems to be pointed out, how can it be that this country of billions of people would turn to a people that's mentioned in the few millions as their start? They could have gone to the United States anywhere else, but often, it's kind of like, I think it's, 106 we say on Shabbos meals, Az Yamhu B'Goyim, what's the next verse? Yeah. First the Goyim say it, and then we say it. It's interesting, the sequence says not by chance. In other words, often the outsiders see the specialty of the world more than we do, more than we see the specialty of us. Okay, so anyway, I thought that we were going to have primarily questions and answers. Some people, just before you came in, were asking about this atheist that changed from being an atheist to being a believer, if you want to call that, a deist. And this atheist, Anthony Flew, F-L-E-W, as I mentioned to the guys, if you guys were standing up there, was the most famous philosopher atheist in the world. So in Britain, I'd never heard of him before when I met him. But in his obituary, which was about 5 years ago, he mentioned that when he wrote a paper in the 1950s proving that there would not be a God, It was the most widely quoted paper in any field of philosophy, in all fields of philosophy, for 50 years. That's like unheard of, that a paper should be quoted for 50 years and be the most popular one. And then it's interesting, I didn't even know I had it with me, but I just saw it a second ago. Yeah, in the back of the file. Yeah. Someone sent me this. This is from the Chicago Tribune. Ex-atheist changed mind about belief, and then it mentions anti-fluid. This is his obituary. Mr. Flew, then of course it says the things that he'd done, the amazing stuff, how he'd proven there wasn't a God. Mr. Flew said he was impressed by the work of Gerald Schroeder, a physicist and Jewish theologian who wrote the book Hidden Face of God. And he pointed out that the statistical probability of things happening by chance is about 0. So, but that doesn't dissuade many people, because statistics are a problem. I'm not a statistician by a long shot, but statistics are a problem because how you set up the statistical model often determines the results you get. Okay, so you have to be careful when you're confronting with statistics unless you've studied a lot. Hence, Aish has several sessions in which they base conclusions on certain statistical likelihood. I don't deal with those because I'm a stronger background in statistics. So anyway, we thought that we will run this session largely on questions that might appear and some possible answers, in order to answer a courses. So if there are questions, one thing I would like to say right off the bat, no matter how the arguments ever go towards proving that there is or there isn't a God, again we just say this outside, the most fundamental question is why there's existence. That's the basis question of all. Then the question after that comes is that which brought existence into being, is that active in the world, namely called God, and then how would that activity be evidenced? It probably would not be, a sign coming down from heaven. China has chosen an Israeli to be the first advisor, therefore I directed that sign God. That's not what's going to happen. So God talks pretty gently as we see. So always remember that the basic question that if you're ever confronted with an argument goes on and on about how you can prove there isn't God, just first of all get a definition of what they think is God. The Rosh Yeshiva I teach at H said the first thing in in any discussion, the first thing you have to do is define your terms. So if you're going to talk about whether it's a God, you have to get your opponent to tell you what he or she thinks God is, or how God would be active in the world, because most people are stuck with a very bizarre picture of how God would be active in the world. It has nothing to do with the biblical God. It's a God of their fantasy. And it's usually the God that they don't believe and you don't believe in either, because their picture of God is so bizarre. Okay, so anyway, and I'm just going to repeat what I said outside, that Marshall McLuhan, the idea of existence. Marshall McLuhan's in the Medium is the Massage, a very interesting book, in any event, he writes, I'm not sure who discovered water. But I'm pretty sure it wasn't the fish. Now, why wouldn't the fish discover water? That's not a rhetorical question. Why wouldn't the fish discover water?
It's their existence.
What?
It's their existence.
It's a Torah, yeah. The right answer was given exactly. They're born into it, as a fellow by the name of Joe, somebody said. They're born into it. For the same reason, we don't question consciousness or existence, because you're born into it. So that you have no experience other than that. So you just take it as a sine qua non. Well, it is essential if you're going to ask that question that there be existence. But it is the basic valid question to ask. Why is there something rather than nothing? And even major atheists, the really smart ones, like Steven Weinberg, theoretical physicist, Nobel laureate, writes, who's an avid agnostic / atheist. I don't think he's an atheist, but he's certainly agnostic. Jewish needs to say. And he says, but even if we answer all the questions, we're still not going to know why there is something rather than nothing. We just take it for granted. But does it have to be existence? That's probably the basic argument. So you have to be careful when you're being confronted by persons, it's the famous statement, you can be it sounds silly, but the professor says, I am absolutely certain that there are no absolutes. So, that's, be careful of that.
What's the
Okay,
difference between an atheist and an agnostic?
say it again, please.
Difference between an atheist and an agnostic.
Well, an atheist thinks, I think an atheist thinks that he knows there's no God. And an agnostic is just uncertain whether there is or there isn't a God. Anthony Flew in his beginning was an atheist. He proved in his mind that there was no God. I don't think his essay proved it, but he'd be quoted, as the most famous paper ever written on that subject. That's, I don't know so how you can be certain there's no God, and that'd be rather bizarre to feel that you can prove there's no God, but you can certain. If you understand the God of the Bible, persons have this idea, especially what Mrs. Franco was saying about, people sometimes think it's a vending machine God. 2 good acts, comes out a happy life. That's not the God of the Bible. That's pretty obvious, yes.
How did Flew prove that there was no God, and how did you disprove him?
I don't think he did prove it. That's the problem. When I read his essay, it was almost. If this is what philosophy is about, stick with science.
I'm sure someone's going to use that proof against us. So,
his argument was: look at the world, and does it look like it's the wrong God? You understand what he's disproving? If there was a God, would there be, an imperfect world? Because we would assume that God would make a perfect world. A colleague of mine from Turkey, his name is very long, I can't remember, he says that God created a perfectly imperfect world. That is a world that is not yet perfect because we're partners. And we see that very clear. It's clear that we're partners in making the world. This may sound heretical, I'm going to say it, but in my opinion, God needed Moses like a hole in the head. God needs Moses to take us out of Egypt. God can take us out of Egypt like that. God has to have Moses do the job. Why don't God just come and slap Pharaoh around a couple times and say, let him out already? But that's not the way the God of the Bible works. So there's this partnership. But the argument would be, well, if God, the simplistic argument would be, why would there be disease? Why would there be errors? Why isn't the design of our eye as good as the design of the octopus eye? The octopus it uses different proteins, but the design of the eye is very, very similar to our eye, except it's a little bit better, because the nerves that pick up the particles of light are called photons, and they come zooming into your eye, and then they hit the back of your eye, right? The retina, everyone knows, near the eye, right? But what's the problem with that? Where are the nerves that then carry, your eyes up in the front? As it has to be, because that's what you want to see where you're going. But all the information is processed back here. So nerves have to get from here back to the back of your head. So where are those nerves? The beginning of the axons that carry the information, the wires that come out of a nerve called axons. And where are they? By the millions, like spaghetti. They're all in front of the retina. Now, the octopus is more clever. The octopus has them in back of the retina. Why wouldn't you want them in front of the retina? Because some of the photons coming in, they hit those fibers, and they're not light sensitive. They're not the part of the nerve that picks up the light, so it absorbs part of the information coming in, and that's why you have a blind spot. Everyone has a blind. You can find it. I'm not going to try to do it now, but if you look at about this far out of your eye, look straight ahead, close this, look straight ahead. Close one eye. Look straight with this eye. Close this eye. And just move this finger back and forth, and eventually the tip disappears. You can find it. Suddenly just disappear. You don't look at the finger. Don't look at the finger. Look straight ahead. And if you take an eye test in Israel, maybe in the States also, you look through like a set of binoculars into a big globe, and then you're looking straight ahead, and every time you see a light flash, you click, and you get this piece of paper back where the clicks are. And it's all black with clicks, except there's 2 circles, there's not a single click at all. Why? Because every time the flash of light was over there, you didn't see it, because you have a blind spot. Why do you have a blind spot? Because the nerves that are in front of the retina, which are also already absorbing light, have to punch a hole in the retina, in the back of the eye, to get back to your visual cortex. And that blind spot is is where they go through, and they go through on both sides because you have eyes, information from both sides, and so they punch a hole in it. That's because it looks like a pretty crummy design, but the Torah never claimed that God designed eyes in an absolutely perfect way. Just like the Torah never claimed that the earth was the center of the universe. Some misguided theologians say the earth was the center. They didn't bother reading the first sentence of the Bible. They first come the heavens and then comes the earth. But many of these claims have given Torah theology a bad name by persons who really don't understand, or they argue from the Septuagint. You have to be very careful. If you have a Christian or let's say a non-Jewish professor in any field, okay, and he doesn't know he or she doesn't know the Hebrew Bible, from the Christians for sure, the argument will very often be from the Septuagint. It's 2,200 years old. We know there are errors in the Septuagint. That's not a question. So there are some people that would claim, well, maybe the Septuagint is more accurate than the Hebrew Bible. I would not. Anytime you talk to most people don't hold by that, but I had this occur at a papal conference. Could be about 5 years ago, and we were all giving papers. It wasn't like a big deal, but I was giving a paper also. But then this expert, this world expert on theology, and biblical theology no less, from I won't say the name of the university, but there are about 5 universities that are the top in the world. They're not yeshiva, the so-called secular, that also have departments of theology, like Oxford, Cambridge, Stanford, Columbia University. They'll have departments of theology, and this expert stands up and he says, the pivotal sentence. Let's see how good your memories are. The pivotal sentence in the entire Bible on the nature of God is Exodus chapter 3, verse 14. Now you might actually know that because you've gone through it pretty recently. What is it? My brain, what is it? Anybody know what it is? It's the pivotal sentence. You don't look in the book, obviously. What is it? No, this is the Christian standing up there. What do you say? And it's the pivotal. He's asked to give this lecture at the papal conference in Rome because he's one of the leading experts in the world, and he says this is the pivotal statement on the God of the Bible in this world. 3:14, chapter 3, verse 14 of Exodus. Yeah, Asher, yeah. Right? What? Yeah, Asher, yeah. And he stands up and he says, he doesn't say yeah, Asher, yeah, he doesn't know the Hebrew. I spoke with him later. He says, I am that I am. I mean, you could fall through the floor. This guy is the leading expert in the world. And he says, yeah, Asher, yeah, means I am that I am. But that's what people want, a pigeonhole God. They don't want the God of yeah, Asher, yeah. Because yeah doesn't mean I am, does it? It means what? I will be. And the irony of that translation of I am that I am, yeah, Asher, yeah, is yeah appears 2 sentences earlier. And I didn't know it at that time. I didn't have a Tanakh with me at the time, so I could only do it from memory. And then I didn't even remember that till he said, I am that I am, and I realized it. Because in Exodus, that's Exodus chapter 3, verse 13, in 14, in Exodus chapter 3, verse 12, 2 sentences earlier, God says, yeah, I will be with you. And everyone, and it's the identical verb in the identical form, yeah. And everyone across the board, Christians, Muslims, whatever, whoever says, I will be with you. But when it comes to God, the idea that it might be a dynamic God is such an anathema that they change it's the identical verb in the identical form, yeah, from I will be to I am. Now, sometimes you can argue, maybe it can go both ways, but the very fact that 2 sentences earlier, it's defined already, I will be. But I will be is not the kind of God you want. If you want a pigeonhole God, you want I am that I am. That's why God says to Moses, you can't see my face, you can only see my back. You're going to see my actions in this world. You're not going to see me face to face. Here's a question. Anyway, so be careful of people when they're quoting the Bible. They're quoting the Hebrew Bible and not some version that they have to give. Yes?
It's very easy in college to be intimidated by like a professor that has like all these degrees. You're saying, do you have like any advice on? Do you have any advice on like how to deal with that?
Well, if you're going, well, let's say it's a biology professor. If it's gonna cost you your degree, I say it seriously, if you're gonna lose your degree by confronting him or her, don't. You know, where do you get your degree? Because it could be that you would lose your degree because of confronting the person. But the best argument, and when you get into biology, of course, it's always evolution. Now, in the teachings that I had at Aish, I haven't had many, but about 5 over the years, about 5 professional, not students anymore, professional biologists that work in paleontology and the development of life and evolution, etc. And all of them I asked to define evolution. Evolution is a 2-stage process. And you won't give me a definition for evolution? Come on. I have a call, so you're talking better than me. Give me a definition of the stages of evolution.
Genetic mutation around selection.
What?
Genetic mutation around selection.
Say it more slowly.
Mutation, natural selection.
What?
Mutation and natural
Yeah,
selection.
but there's always a word that comes before mutation.
Random.
Random. Always it's random. There was no, well, I told you, sampling of 5 people, so it's not a big sampling of my turn. Random mutations in the sex line produce changes, so some lions are born strong and some lions are born weak. That's the first stage. And then the second stage is 100% not random. So they'll always argue, well, evolution isn't random. Evolution isn't random. Look, strong lions kill weak lions. Okay? The reason that there aren't a lot of lions in the world is not hunters. Lions kill lions. Fast cheetah get more food than slow cheetah. That's not random. The problem is it's the first stage. The second stage obviously isn't random. Strong lions kill weak lions. That's the way the world is put together. But the first stage is that word random. And the confrontation that you can have, if it's not going to cost you the degree, or after you get your degree, you know, you're just throwing your hat in the water and you get the degree. Then you go, show me any data that demonstrate that the mutations are random. There are zero data that shows that the mutations are random. In fact, if you look at the statistics, it looks more like they're not random, but even that aside, there are also zero data to prove that it's God. And eventually, in one of these sessions, I've said it all the time, so maybe I said it the last time I was here, because I throw it out each time, and someday someone's going to bite on it, I hope. There will be a guy or a gal in the audience that is either a lawyer or has access to, in family, or a high-powered, intelligent lawyer, because the ones that handled in Pennsylvania about 15 years ago must have been dummies, but or take it to the Supreme Court, because teaching evolution in science classrooms in the United States of America as being random mutations, making changes, is illegal. Not that it's forbidden, it's illegal at the federal level. You are not allowed to teach theology in the United States of America. You are not allowed at the federal level to teach theology in any science classroom in a school that gets public funding. If it's a private school, it can do what it wants. But most private schools get public funding also. It is forbidden to teach theology in science class. It's forbidden. It's not like you have a choice. It's forbidden to teach theology in science classrooms in schools in the United States of America that are getting public funding, in Britain also. And the word evolution, as it is taught in schools, is a theological statement. The statement random mutations, etc., is a theological statement. It is saying what relative to God? God, well, isn't active. And that's as strong a theological statement as getting up in there and saying God is active. And someday, we'll get it to the courts, and a smart lawyer will win it. That the textbooks have to say that we do not know if it's random or not. There are zero data that demonstrate that the mutations are random. Again, I'm not saying, I'm saying from the other side also, you can't prove that they're not random. But that thought is not a neutral statement. It says exactly what you say, random mutations produce the changes, and then the second stage is strong lions eat weak lions. And that's forbidden. That's forbidden, and it would have to be included in the textbook somehow, stuck on the page, that we don't have the data that proves that the mutations are random or not. And the idea again, well, if really God was active, why would the eye be perfect? You know, why would you have a blind spot in your eye? It's a fallacious argument, because we know very well that in reading the rest of the text of the Torah, you see that there are things that occur where God acknowledges that the system could be better than it is. Well, who set the system up in the first place? And what would be the classic example? Now, because in Genesis chapter 1, all the idea of evolution, development, the whole flow of the world. You get 26 sentences from the creation of the world to the first mention of Adam. So there's almost no information given. So it's the rest of the text you have to learn by what we call case study up the river in Harvard. That's what they would do, where the examples are given. What would be an example in the Torah, where in this magnificent world that God created and put together, that there was something less than perfect, and God says, oy vey, and the English translation of the word, I regret the whole thing in the first place. What would be a classic, what? I can't say
Elohim, Rashi, and
What?
Bereshis. Elohim, Rashi, and Bereshis.
No, don't be Russian with the text. With the text. I don't want, because they won't accept it. You have to understand interpretations they're not going to go over. I say, well, that's what he says, but what does the Bible say?
Moshe had a lisp.
Huh?
Moshe had a lisp.
That's interesting. Yeah, Moshe had a list, but there's a, yeah. Okay, that's interesting right there.
It says the Humpty.
Huh?
It says the Humpty, I regret it.
Yeah, regret. Humpty. I regret having made the animal kingdom. And God brings on the flood. It's the identical word that who chooses Saul to be the first king of Israel? Who chooses Saul to be the first king of Israel? Huh? What? Your cave up? No. Saul is the first king of Israel. Who chooses him? No, Shmuel doesn't choose him. Shmuel anoints him. But who chose him? Hashem. And is God too pleased with that a few sentences later? God says the identical word is chapter 6, verse 7 in Genesis, where it says, Humpty, I regret having chosen Saul king. So the biblical, now what regret means on the divine level might be slightly different than you're, regretting buying the wrong kind or whatever it is. But the simple fact is, when you hear Humpty, it's not good news. One is the sudden Saul is the king. So clearly the biblical God, as we understand how God acts in this world, is not a God that is that guaranteed to make the world appear in our terms perfect. Whether there are divine reasons, for 3 boys getting murdered, that's as you said, they have to be pretty special level to see whether you actually can see that. Okay, so, but for sure we don't understand how, as you say, how the world works. But the Torah gives you a pattern in which do not expect everything to look perfect, because there's the example, Humpty. And on comes the flood, and lifespans drop from 900 years down to about 90 years. 900-year-old people was a lousy idea. God says a point blank. It was 10 generations from Adam to Noah. You only know about 10 people anyway, so we don't know what the rest of the world was doing with that. But they had these own,
Do you ever find that in your work sometimes you find that you're taking, like when you try and connect Torah and science, that you're taking Torah from science rather than the other way around, and remembering that really everything comes from Torah and it's not really taking Torah out of science? Like I've heard speakers speak before, and they're trying to fit Torah into their big science ideas. But really, should it not be the other way around, that you're taking out science and really learning it all from the Torah?
Well, I don't think you're going to learn the laws of relativity from Torah. I'm saying seriously, with quantum physics. Whether Moses knew quantum physics or not, we have no idea. I have no idea anyway. I don't think anyone has any idea. But, so I think there are aspects of science that are not visible in the Torah, but when you understand those aspects of science, suddenly a lot of things. That was the biggest compliment I ever had. I'm working out of it. It's a snowy day in Toronto, and one of the big day schools, about 200 kids in the gym, all of high school, all of the upper year. And I'm walking, I don't turn around, and I hear one, I know it's a woman, because I can help with the girl's voice. Girl says to another, finally it all makes sense. So that didn't come because I figured it out from the Torah. The science just flopped itself in front of me that so I don't think you can learn everything out of Torah if you want to invent an aspirin as an example. That's why I think secular learning. I think many people feel secular learning doesn't have to be. Well, first, I don't think there's any such thing as if you only go to God by its actions, then there is no secular learning. There's nothing secular. That's just a very unfortunate dichotomy that people have made. There's nothing secular. I don't think in Israel there's one. I don't think there's one Israeli that's secular. Zero. Some do some mitzvot, some do other mitzvot. I mean, you wouldn't live in Israel if you were secular or demented. Let's say there's one normal Israeli that would live in Israel if he or she was secular. Who needs it? They can go to Australia and make a fortune, and do whatever they want. The Jews who want it all over the world because of the brains. So some people do some mitzvot and some people do other mitzvot. You know, there are a lot of easy mitzvot like keeping kosher. Standing Torah is a much harder mitzvah.
You know, it's like a story, like a debate that you ever had with somebody?
Debate that I had with somebody. I'm not sure. Well, I can tell you one debate which was terrible because they didn't prepare for it. And I look back on it and it was disastrous. It was with Richard Dawkins. I mean, I must have been out of my mind. I just didn't. The night before with my wife, I went to the theater. I didn't want to, but I had to go. Because that's, I've been married for 40 years, you know, that got me. Anyway, so I'm trying to think. No. Okay. If I can figure it comes, I mean, by email, I had an ongoing debate with Stephen Hawking. Until he finally, you know, he said, look, I can see you're trying to use what I'm saying to prove there's a God. And then that was the last email I got. Okay? I'm serious, that was the last thing he mentioned. Okay? I wasn't trying to use it, I was just trying to point out from what he's discussing is so, you know, very, so that would be debate via email. Okay?
After seeing a lot of your works, I've seen that you've talked a lot about how God proved that God exists, and also that Torah and science do coincide; they're not contradictory. But I haven't really seen so much of how exactly the Torah is proven.
How?
The Torah is divine. How we know the Torah is divine.
How we know the Torah is divine. Well, I would say it has such a deep knowledge in it that you know, it doesn't seem to could come from by randomness, but I would say the Torah 3,000 years ago makes a prediction that we will be the marker in the world. Now, that's 3,000 years ago, a lot of generations, and there's no indication coming out of a bunch of slaves, you know, at Sinai, that we will be the marker in this world. But even Gentiles hold it that we're the marker in the world, that we are a marker. Even Hitler did it. That's what he wanted to get rid of, so God forbid. Okay, so I think, in my opinion, that's the biggest demonstration to me, that the Torah has this information, but it makes the prediction. I mean, I could say, look, there's 6 days, and why does it say Yom Echad b'mkom Yom Rishon, and you know all that stuff, and show how the years match, and they do. But I don't think, you know, that's not going to convince the average secular person. But the average secular person is stuck with the fact that the Torah makes a prediction. We will be the marker, for better or for worse, and in the world, and that's, you know, that's pretty much marked out. We are the marker. Not that we're better or worse, for better. I mean, you look at the closing, Deuteronomy chapter 32 is almost the end of the Torah. Right? It's only like a chapter and a half before the end. And Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 26 and verse 27, it's really worth reading and taking it to heart. But God says, point blank, I would have wiped you off the face of the earth. You're such schlemiels, I would have destroyed you. And it's a straight statement. This is essentially the end of the Torah. It's chapter 32 and it's chapter 33 and then 34, and he has a few sentences. It says, I would have wiped you off the face of the earth because you're such losers. But I can't do it because the nations of the world will say that they did it. You know, like God didn't come down like Nebuchadnezzar showing, here I am. You know, Nebuchadnezzar came in. It's worth reading it about 5 times, once or twice a week. Because it's point blank, the only reason you are here is the nations of the world. It's the trump card that Moses uses every time. It's never how good we are. It's that we're the marker. At the golden calf, God says point blank, Moses, I'm going to wipe him out. He says, Anichali, leave me alone. God has to tell Moses to leave him alone. Clearly he's asking for an argument. God's asking for an argument. And then I'm going to wipe them out. The golden calf, and it's the identical argument that takes place when the spies come back from Canaan. God's, you know, and the men, the women don't. They realize the women all make it in the desert. It's the men that die in the desert. Goes over 20. And again, God hits the roof and says, I'm going to wipe them out. And both times, Moses pulls out the trump card. At the golden calf, well, God says you can do it, but it's not in your best interest. It's like Moses reads the facts of life to God. It sounds very heretical, but that's the reality of the text. And Moses says to God, you can wipe them out, but then the Egyptians will say you only took them out to the desert to kill them. Now, who cares what the Egyptians say? Does anyone really care what the Egyptians say? Yeah, guess who cares? Who cares? Good. And it's the identical argument at the spies. The spies. Spies go back, God hits the roof again and says, this time Moses, I'm really watching them out and making other people. And Moses says, yeah, God, you can do it, but it's not in your best interest because the nations of the world will say you're a wimp and weren't strong enough to bring us in. Now, who cares about the nations of the world? Who? Who? Yeah, God. We're around only for one reason, the nations of the world. We're the marker in the world, and God wants the nations to know that there is a marker. And as Rabbi David Hartman said, of blessed memory, God fell in love with Abraham. God fell in love with Abraham and got stuck with his grandchildren. That's exactly what the text says in Deuteronomy. There's such shlios I would have wiped out, but I can't do it because the nations will say that that I wasn't there running the show. So let's say thank God for the nation. Let's just hope the covenant remains. Yes. Yes.
Okay. Believing in God has never really been my issue.
Say it again.
Believing in God has never really been my issue. I've always been a believer. But occasionally you come across a really annoying atheist, random people on the street, by meals you meet them. Well, what would be your proving of God in 2 minutes? Just to get them off your back. But that's not necessarily what I believe is good enough for me to accept that there's a God in the world.
Okay. A God as a creator, or God as a active in the world. There's a video. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a 5-minute video. I'm going to talk to you. It was done without a script. It's just, we wanted to make it 5 minutes, so we shot it 3 times. First 7 minutes, second time 6 minutes, and the third time 5.5 minutes. And that's what, there's no script for it, but it's proof of God in 5 minutes. I urge you to take, if you haven't seen it, proof of God in 5 minutes. What's amazing about this video, first of all, the graphics are great. I have nothing to do with graphics, zero. But the argument is good enough that it has over 3 million views. Now, to get 3 million views on anything where you're not singing a popular song is essentially unheard of. It may be one of the most widely disseminated videos that's strictly intellectual. It has nothing to do. And it's good enough to get,
It's enough to prove to someone who doesn't have.
Yeah, you don't get millions of views if it's, you get shut down after the first 100,000. But the argument I say is, tell me about the creation of the world. This is the video, and it only takes 5 minutes and 28 seconds, so it's not a big investment of time. And you just go to Google or whatever, just type in proof of God in 5 minutes, Gerald Schroeder. Even without Gerald Schroeder, that's me. You'll probably get it, but it just because it's such a wide readership viewing. And what the argument is as follows. I only use NASA data, National Air Space Authority. All my work is only based on secular, non-theological data. I don't use Bible thumping data at all. Okay, and this is totally on NASA. And they have a diagram that shows the development of the universe. It's a diagram I use in all my sessions. If we have PowerPoint there, it looks like it comes straight from the web, and it's this diagram here. It hasn't changed in 5 years, 10 years. This piece of paper is almost 10 years old, and it's the creation of the universe. And the entire 5 minutes are based on this. But what's interesting here, this is the development of the universe over time, but what's interesting here is that there's a creation to the universe. This is straight from NASA. You go to NASA, National Space Authority, and then you type in WMAP, the initials for this satellite, and you get this diagram. Every word on here is straight from the scientific community. From the scientific community. They're the ones that tell the world how the world comes to give. And they show a beginning to the universe, and they call it a quantum fluctuation. So quantum fluctuation is part of the laws of nature. So they point out, and this is the work of T.R.Y.O.N. Trier in 1970, that you can create a universe from absolute nothing, provided you have the laws of nature. All you need is the laws of nature to create a universe from nothing. Nature allows yesh ma'ayin, like it or not. If you've ever heard the idea that nature doesn't allow yesh ma'ayin, forget it, because it's not true. Nature allows the creation of something from absolute nothing provided you got the laws of nature. I mean, that's the catch. So if you look at what this diagram says, this is probably the strongest theological statement that science may ever be able to make. I have no idea if the creators of this diagram realized it, but they're telling us that a force of nature, or the forces of nature, create the universe from absolute nothing. Now, the fact that they create the universe from absolute nothing, and our understanding of time begins with the universe, so those forces of nature predate our understanding of time. It's hard to say predate, because it sounds like there's time before time. But the fact is, we're stuck with English, we're stuck with words. So our understanding, yeah, you guys get chocolate milk and I get water. Very nice, okay. We understand, forget it, Muhammad died. A little bit. Now we understand. Now you're talking. In case it isn't shown on the video, this is my share. It smells good. So let me send it around for you guys to get. Anyway, so but pay attention, because this is essentially the 3 million views, which is a gigantic number for a totally intellectual statement. Science has said that we created the universe, that the universe was created from absolute nothing. This is not a vacuum out here, but that is nothing. That nothing doesn't fit in the human brain, that's a problem. Every thought you have is built of space and time, matter. A vacuum is not nothing. It's an empty space. That occurs in here. This is nothing. This is not empty space, this is nothing. And it doesn't fit in the brain. And the graphics are very good. I have nothing to do with the graphics on there. I wouldn't do better. But what I see from this diagram here, is that the scientific community has accepted the fact that our universe, I'm talking about our universe, let there be other universes, I'm not even discussing that. Our universe had a beginning, which is big news, because until 50 years ago, that was debated by science also, where science held that the universe is eternal. Our universe had a beginning, and the beginning was caused by a force of nature, which means a force of nature to create the universe tells us that it predates our understanding of time. So putting it in general terms, what this diagram says explicitly is that a force outside of time that is not physical, because the laws of nature are not physical, the laws of nature act on the physical. See, the laws like gravity. That's not physical, it's a force. So we have a force, not physical, outside of time, creates the universe from absolute nothing. That is the scientific description of your origins, and the chocolate milk's origin also. A force, not physical, outside of time, creates the universe from absolute nothing. And that should sound pretty familiar. What does it sound like? Well, it's one-on-one with the biblical definition of God. It is the definition of God. Science has indeed discovered God. And this is where it usually ends when I have debates with these names that you're mentioning before, the famous names. So the only question that remains now is, so the cup is now half full. I mean, that in itself is a phenomenal breakthrough for science/theology, that science has described this creation. So then the question obviously arises immediately, from whence arose the laws of nature. Okay, but the fact that suddenly we have a description, which is the biblical description of God, creating the universe from nothing, makes you really wonder that maybe, in fact, we do have a divine force that put these forces into place to create the universe, because 3,000 years ago this was laid out. So the question is, I'll get you along, what goes beyond that is then that which created the universe active in the universe today, and that's our role. So there are many sessions that are given. Many persons have it. Ted Spiro has a great series of argument discussions about the history of the Jews. It doesn't make sense. But it's always us. We don't make sense. That's why people hate us. It doesn't make sense. The nice thing about when I work with the born again Christians, they all love it. They're the ones that love us. Usually out of a billion of them be in good shape. And they all right across the mix. They may believe what they believe is their intermediate. but they all say we're the chosen people and God spoke with us. There are many people that believe that. But the question that you have to know then is, what does the Bible expect? So now I have exactly the description of the biblical God, and again saying, well, since it predicted this 3,000 years ago and now science finds it, it's pretty clear to me that the divine metaphysical force we call God put all this stuff in place. So the question is it now active in this part of the world, or is it just a deist God? So Moses in chapter 32 verse 7, and it's chapter 32 of Deuteronomy, chapter 37 says, if you want to figure out if there's a God in this world, Zechor Yemot Olam Bino Chinot Dor V'Dor. Zechor Yemot Olam, remember the days of old. Moses breaks the calendar into two parts, for the proof of God. Zechor Yemot Olam Bino Chinot Dor V'Dor. Now the Ramban says, Zechor Yemot Olam, the Sheshet Bereshit, the development of the universe, the 6 days of Genesis, the development of the universe from here, we're on this line right out here, from here out to here. Does that make sense? Light beams become alive, conscious, feeling love. Where does a light beam have the chutzpah to feel love? But that is what this diagram says. The only creation was energy. No one debates that. Stuff wasn't created. Einstein showed how energy could change form, become solid matter. But it's still only it's only energy that is, and it doesn't matter, string theory, whatever, it all comes down to the same electromagnetic radiation. And it becomes alive. That's what this diagram, so Ramban says that's the first part, the Choyim the flow from here, the people sleeping through lectures, and that's it. But then the second half is Bino Chinot Dor V'Dor. And Bino Chinot Dor V'Dor is look at flow of social history. Because social history makes sense, and we're the marker in social history. The Torah says we will be the marker. Well, we were a little bunch of, barely sniffling tribe, tiny tribe, and we're going to be the marker in history. And it turns out we're the marker in history. I mean, China turned to Israel. It's crazy. You've got billions of people. America's the big voice in the world, not Israel. All my publications that they were interested in come from Israel. In fact, they told me point blank to my face, we're going to ask you questions. We hope you're going to answer them. Don't you ask any questions. That's what they said to me to my face. Don't you ask any questions. I assure you, I wasn't. First of all, I'm Israeli, and the country doesn't mention it. And second of all, you get it swallowed up there. It was such a coup to see China win. It was China. But why would they do it? There's 1,000 examples like this. That just goes, it's personally me, but there are other examples. The development in science, and C.P. Snow, not a Jew, not a special Jew, lover of Jews, called the early 1900s the Jewish Revolution, because overwhelmingly it was Jews that changed the scientific world. The moment our doors were open for Jews to do it, we did it. It doesn't make sense, and the Bible predicted it. That's the key. So if I want to know if the Bible was divine, I think to me that's the strongest of the arguments. Yes.
So there are so many proofs, different angles that you're mentioning now when you have your books. There are a lot of really smart professors out there who seem to be very smart, and they don't believe in God. So the question is, I'm interested in what you think, what's happening to them. Some of the smarties say, well, if a smart person doesn't believe in God, it's because really he is, he's biased. Because he knows once he believes in God, what does God want from me, and that can change my life, and he doesn't want to go there. So he creates blind spots in order to avoid admitting, to that truth. Is that how you approach it? How do you defend all these really smart people that just, your proofs seem so compelling, and the math is there? My father-in-law is a mathematician. He loves your books. He loves them. I can't understand them. I understand a little bit. He loves them. He says, this is amazing. I was talking. He loves them. So, and I understand the parts that aren't advanced math. So the question is, so how do you explain? What's your view on all these thousands of professors that people come in contact with? What do you think they're thinking?
Well, when I finally have a discussion with ones that I've had discussions with, the lower levels, I didn't get to this level with Humpty talking to this much shorter, 5 or 6 emails. When you finally ask them for the description of God, you discover you don't believe in that God either. Usually the picture that they have of a God is totally different from the biblical God. And it's what I was saying before. They would assume that if there really was a God, the world would be perfect. Well, nowhere does the Torah. The Torah, in fact, makes the actual opposite claim. So that's usually what I find out, that they don't. Also, but they'll take their argument won't start from here. It'll start from here. You've already got existence, now let's go forward with that. Can we work it one way or the other? That's my discussions with them is usually first define what they mean by God. And if it's just a creator, but it's usually a creator that's active and controls every item, and there are persons that say nothing happens by chance, but that is neither the Ramban nor the Rambam. The Ramban is highly enlightening on Genesis chapter 19, verse 18, where God says, I've known Abraham. And the Ramban says, why are you told God knows everyone? He said, yeah, God guards the Shur HaKlalim, to guard the group, but the individual has to watch his or her back. And we see that explicitly going into battle in Israel, in Deuteronomy. I'm going to fight for you, you're going to win the war, and then 2 sentences later, but by chance, if you built a house and you haven't dedicated, lived in it yet, go home, unless you die in battle. If you engaged a woman, you haven't married her, you go home, unless you die in battle. If you planted a vineyard, you haven't eaten the fruits, you go home. What's it says you die in battle? 4 sentences earlier, I was told I'm going to win the war. Yeah, but not you necessarily. The way I see it is the train leaves the station. Whether you get on the train or not, that's your choice. That's the train to get away from you. But those are statements right there. In other words, in fact, this is very similar to what Mrs. Frankel was saying about, whether it was divinely like this, so we'd find the tunnels or something. It's wonderful if you can see it that way, and not as I don't mean wonderful like brainwashing. You can see it or fantasizing. I mean, it may very well have been the case. We're never going to know that. I mean, anyway, so for the Ramban is the group, and but then it continues, the more righteous, and both of them say the same thing, the Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim, I think it's part 3, chapter 51, which says, and also the Ramban says that the more righteous you are, the more direct the control is. It's your choice that God in or not get in. And the daughter of Billy Graham had a magnificent answer once. It was after Columbine, where there's a big murder in the school, someone comes in and shoots 42, some God forbid, some big number. And so the interviewer, somebody's interviewed, tried it, man, the interviewer says, well, this is Billy Graham, the famous evangelist, and now it's his daughter speaking, who takes over the role. Well, if why would this happen? What kind of God is this? He asks her, and she answer is perfect. You kick God out of you kicked God out of the classroom. This is what you get. What you get. Well, who didn't answer? Oh, you're gonna.
What do you think? What are your thoughts about Mashiach or B'chlal Olam Haba? It's close, or in general. What are their thoughts as well?
You get up to God. I have no idea about the timing, etc. I don't think it's a good idea to tweak these things too much clearly, because don't open the mouth to Satan. Satan. So I don't talk about that stuff. But I do think now we have discovered, in fact, scientifically, that there is a part of our existence that extends beyond life. And we're talking about just outside now, but it comes actually from a lot of neurological data. The body dies and the brain dies. We talked about this maybe a bit last time also, but there's a part of the brain that is sensitive to a part of you that's outside your body. Like you've got a part of the brain that's sensitive to color, it's called your eyes. You've got a part of the brain that's sensitive to sound, it's called your ears. And there's a part of it that's sensitive to garlic, your nose. And there's also, so the brain is always tuned for knowing what's outside, because that's what keeps you alive. Right? The brain is your access, has all the antennas to check the world around. But there's also part of the brain that when you stimulate it, you experience you outside of your body. And I think that's the part of the antenna. Neurologists don't say that, that's my understanding of it, that part of the brain, that when you stimulate it, you experience yourself outside of your body. You are experiencing, you could say your neshama, your soul, if you want to say it, the part of you that is not related, that's not shackled to your physical body. So as far as life after death, that's that part doesn't die with your body. Death would mark the end of your body's participation. and I'll call it your mind, just to make it non-prejudicial either for God, not for God. The mind is outside of the brain. Descartes talked about it, but now we have neurological data. There's studies from brain studies that show that there actually is a part of the brain that looks out at a part of you that is not you, which would be a dualistic brain. But understand it. Descartes theorized it, but he didn't have any of this information. And now when you take the logic of how the brain works, it looks very much like this is the case. And so that means that would be the first indication that there is a first scientific indication that there's actually a mind outside the brain. When you get to quantum physics, it looks like the whole world is mind. Many quantum physics, at the Nobel Prize, they'll talk about the idea that the basics of existence isn't this physical world that we experience. Basic existence is totally spiritual. It's totally not physical, metaphysical. The reason that we see it as physical, because our bodies are part of the physical world, but there's an aspect that's not physical.
Do you know of any, like, I don't want to call evidence or like scientific evidence or proof or whatever of like performing mitzvot or learning Torah like affecting like physical reality, like on any level? Like,
there's studies about prayers and sick people, but they're very it depends whose data you read. Some say, one of my daughters is a nurse, and she came back. We were excited. They had this study, and a report of a study how prayer influenced the rate of healing. But there are other studies that show that there's no evidence. So I mean, it is equivocal. I don't know if you can prove. For sure, the world. I think for certain, on a physical level, the world is not a vending machine world. 2 mitzvot in, pull the crank, and out comes, material rewards. I don't. For certain, not. Put 2 mitzvot in and crank the door. What you get is a meaningful life or a godly life. It may not put bread on your table, but you do get a godly life. I don't know, do you have a question? I'm just looking for people that haven't answered yet. We go to 5 or 10?
Well, we'll go to 5, but listen, guys, anybody who needs now, take a break, go to the bathroom before Rav Gav, who's giving a shiur, not a presentation, for the guys who want a little bit more. But you need the bathroom, take it now. Dr. Schroeder is going to continue, though, taking questions.
And when do I speak?
You're speaking in exactly 5 o'clock downstairs in the auditorium. So if you need a break, also stop whenever you need a break.
I will have some of this chocolate milk if you don't mind.
Coffee, iced coffee.
Oh, gee, wow. Great.
Very good. So we'll wait 1 minute, let the guys go out. We'll be noisy.
Please. You guys don't want to stay for Sammy's question?
Sammy, answer your question.
In terms of evolution, in terms of evolution, like when the pasuk says that God formed Adam from the dust of the earth, how does that square with our science's understanding that man evolved from an ape? Like how can you
use the word developed? Man developed from a that's what they were. I squared away. I see that chapter 2, verse 7, where I would say that this may not satisfy, but I think it's about 4 billion years worth of history in that sentence. It's a retelling of Adam from Genesis chapter 1. In fact, Adam is formed from the dust of the ground. That's what he's called, Adam, like Adamah.
Yeah.
And then the sentence goes on. It says that God puts in the neshama, through the neshama comes in.
Yeah.
And then it says, how does it end? V'yidam l'nefesh chaya.
Yeah.
The ending is very interesting. V'yidam l'nefesh chaya.
Yeah.
Man became through l'nefesh chaya.
Yeah.
So the English translation is only leave out that lamed because the lamed doesn't quite fit in.
Yeah.
But v'yidam l'nefesh chaya. Nefesh chaya appears with the water animals on day 5, and the Onkelos translates it as nefesh hayta in the Aramaic, right? Nefesh haya, nefesh hayta, and then in day 6 with the land animals, nefesh haya, nefesh hayta. That's Onkelos. And now the only time nefesh haya appears with Adam is chapter 2, verse 7. V'yidam l'nefesh haya. the lamed should translate over into the Aramaic, and it should be the nafsha hayta. But it isn't, right? Nefesh chaya, nafsha hayta, water animals. Nefesh chaya, nafsha hayta, land animals. Humans, le nefesh chaya, is translated as the, everyone knows what it is? What? Exactly. The ruach mamala. This is the origin of the mistranslation of the difference between humans and animals is speech. Because if Onkelos was saying, in this sentence, Onkelos gives us our definition of what it is to be human. And notice he doesn't say chaya mamala. We're not speaking animals. The difference between humans and animals is not speech. It's ruach mamalala. It's spiritual speech. And it's crucial to make that difference because speech for sure existed before the neshama was put into this couple called Adam, we call Adam and Eve. And what? So speech existed. Forming goes back 10,000 years. You don't invent forming without speech. But it wasn't spiritual. What differentiates us is exactly what Onkelos saw. Ruach mamalala. Spiritual speech. It's the neshama that changed the world. And I think we went through it last time. You go to the British Museum. Anyone from Britain here or gets to the British Museum? Don't pass up, not the Science Museum, that's great also, but the British Museum, not the Kensington Museum, the Science Museum. British Museum, the center of town. Go to the second or third floor of the Mesopotamian wing. And there on the wall, it's an entire wing, and it shows the change in the world. And we may have talked about this last time. The change in the world, this is another proof of the Bible. It says that the world changed. It devotes an entire wing to this phenomena, that the world changed in such a way, it's called, I think I can find it quickly because I have some pictures of it actually. It's called the earliest cities. The earliest cities. This is the British Museum, 100% secular. The earliest city, here it is right here. This is a picture of the plaque on the wall which tells you what you're seeing. The earliest cities. I would just like to show that I was really here. So. And it says the following. And it's just amazing. I tell you, sometimes you see something that's like you want to fall in tears on the floor. It says that the large cities, it dates a change in society that is so great that the British Museum, this huge, magnificent museum, in one of the most expensive real estate places in the world, devotes an entire wing to a change that occurred in society 5,500 years ago. They date it 5,500 years ago. Date sound familiar? It should sound familiar. It's right after the neshama comes into the world. Why wasn't it changed 10,000 years ago with farming? That's a big deal. Or 100 other things. They say 5,500 years ago, the world changed. Society changed. Society changed, and the first large cities, writing is invented. It goes a whole list of things that take place. And I asked the curator, because that's what's amazing. The plaque says it, right? It actually says, 3,500 BC. So I was going to say 5,500 because it's 2,000 years. 5,500. It's amazing. Right after the Torah claims that there will be a change in civilization, science comes. It's Psalm 85, the truth shall spring from the earth. That science changed. Civilization changed. Writing is invented, first large city. Why would the neshama change the world? Because before you had a neshama, you couldn't have a large city. Before the neshama, if you weren't part of my chamula, my immediate clan, it's a good word to know, the chamula is in Arabic and Hebrew, the central family, mom, dad, the kids, a couple of cousins and stuff like that, grandma, grandpa. If you weren't part of my chamula, stay off my land. Because we don't want anything to do with you. The neshama changed the world. Suddenly, if you weren't in my immediate gene pool, put it that way, you could live together because you couldn't have large cities. Before the neshama, you couldn't have a large city. It was only the neshama that changed the world, that allowed large cities to develop. And the museum dates it, and I spoke with the curator, directly with the curator of this entire exhibit, and I asked him what caused it. I didn't mention God, neshama. And he said, we have no idea. We have no idea why this change occurred right here. Because there's no change, it wasn't like suddenly the fossils are different shapes or something. They're the same size fossils. Because the neshama didn't change the fossils. The neshama changed the spirit. And it's amazing. It's amazing that this phenomenal bastion of intellectual understanding would date essentially exactly the period in which the Torah says a change took place. Maybe that's why the Bible developed a calendar. Who needs a Bible? I didn't know that it was 130 years till Adam had Seth, 105 years to Enoch. Who cares? Who cares how many years? Let's accept that the Bible wanted a calendar to be developed. The Torah wanted us to develop a calendar. And we see that in chapter 4 and chapter 5. The first 6 days go by, then the calendar doesn't begin until chapter 5. With Seth, the third kids. But chapter 4 is filled with all the genealogy of Cain. From Adam and Eve, 2 kids. Cain murders Abel. Abel's dead. Cain is exiled. And chapter 4, in great detail, tells us all the things that Cain's progeny do. But one thing it doesn't tell us about Cain's progeny is what? Their ages. There are no ages listed for Cain's progeny. Why? When I get to Seth, I give him 3-figure accuracy. 130 years to Seth, 105 years to Enoch. Why? Why nothing for Cain? Because Cain's line is irrelevant to a calendar. What they did was important, but it's irrelevant to a calendar because Cain's line disappears. And the Torah does not have irrelevant data. If there had been years listed for Cain's progeny, you would have to assume somehow that would be important. But the years aren't. What they did was important, but no ages are given. And yet you come a few sentences later, and now into chapter 5, and you're given all this information about ages. Who cares who cares it's 130 years between Cain, or 105 to who cares? Well, apparently the Bible cared enough to give us the information, and suddenly you can add these up, and you discover that approximately about 57, 76 years ago, there's a change enters the world that's going to change the world, and then it spreads, and bingo, the British Museum digging up the fossils. Wow, 5,500 years, and the curators. That's just so beautiful. The curators said we have no idea. Can't be population explosion. For those big cities, it's big population explosion. That goes back 10,000 years to farming. It takes brains for farming, but it doesn't take spirituality. That's the spirituality that God wants to have in the world.
How do the biggest atheists explain first cause?
They don't. That's the point. They don't. Exactly. That was so annoying. I was having lunch with actually at the Milky Way out in Los Angeles, and an Oscar-winning family. Okay, and they have a guest at the table, and he's reading Krauss. What's his first book? Universe of Nothing. Oh, look at this. You don't need all this stuff you're saying. Short of this, and this. And he just pointed out. He doesn't explain the first cause. In fact, to the point, he said, in writing, well, I don't know if it's in writing, but he says, it's in an interview, some purists, putting it down, always are asking about where the laws came from. That's the basic question. Everything else is secondary to that. They're always asking where the base. So they avoid the first cause. That's exactly what it is. Because there is no answer for the first cause.
How does not everybody reject them?
What?
How does not everyone reject them?
Many people are not interested in this argument.
People not even think about it?
I guess not, because how could you avoid it? And then even Anthony Flew didn't even relate to this. He only related to the fact that it seems very likely that rocks and water will evolve into people. And that was what made him become.
Thank you.
Any question? Any first timers? Yeah. A first timer ask a question.
Just 2 questions. One, when you ever had a debate with somebody, at any time during the debate, did you feel like losing your cool and just lashing out and just saying what are you talking about?
Always.
What do you do to hold yourself back?
Well, I try to remember that there's a famous book called 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. There's millions and millions of copies. The most important habit of all, or at least the one most, he said of all, is listen to your opponent. Listen to your opponent. Your opponent will probably give you your answer to him. In other words, most people, when they're fired up, the person is saying something, and you're essentially formulating your answer while the other person is still giving you the information, which means you don't hear the other part of it. This happened to me at CERN. You know where CERN is, where they did the Higgs particle? So CERN is interesting enough because it's so famous that they don't mind mixing science and faith. So it happened a year ago and about a year ago and about a half a year ago. I was at a conference. They brought 50 of us from around the world at CERN to discuss faith and science, which is interesting because there's very few science organizations that will allow faith on the property. But CERN is so famous, you know, they don't have to worry about their reputation. So having this conference, and there's all people. What's interesting is only 50 of us were invited, and of that 50, 3 of us were kippah-wearing Jews, and this makes it out of statistics right away. But about 5 others were Jews that weren't wearing kippahs. Well over 10%, way over 10%, maybe 20, were Jews. It's interesting. But they were guys in long swami robes, and there were people with the straight collars, but they were all scientists. Everyone was scientists there. Science and theologian or just scientists. And one guy, turns out he's a Jew, unfortunately. I'm not, he's surely Jewish, sort of. But I met, no, excuse me, I have to take it back. He wasn't. But it's the idea of listening. So we're having this conference, and I said, don't you think it's rather amazing that and one of the examples of the tuning of the universe is what made Fred Hoyle, the person who coined the term the Big Bang. Everyone's heard the term the Big Bang. You realize it was coined in derision. It wasn't coined in praise, it was in pure derision. That Hoyle, who believed the universe was eternal, later on in his life he becomes, I'd say, over-the-top believer. Hoyle, who believed the universe was eternal, because most scientists did in the 50s and 60s and the early 70s, the universe is eternal. There was never a beginning. The Bible is wrong from Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Forget the rest of it. But so the interviewer said, well, Professor Hoyle, on the British Broadcasting Corporation radio, about 1951, what do you think about your colleagues that say there is actually a beginning to the universe? And he said, oh yeah, there was some kind of Big Bang. And the press picked it up. That's the origin of the term the Big Bang. It was a derision. But what made Hoyle become an over-the-top cosmologist was the development of the elements. And he's credited with one of the persons that showed how the elements come out of this burst of energy. You only get hydrogen, helium. And then how do you get up to carbon and oxygen and iron, uranium? And he showed how this happened. But there's a nuance. So I'm jumping now back to a year ago at CERN. So we're having this discussion, and I say, don't you think, I'm trying to give an example of God active in this world. Don't you think it's amazing that in this world of ours, where all complex life is carbon-based, that carbon is the most abundant element in the universe. Now, at this point, the person that was about to attack me, there was some kind of friction there, maybe because I was obviously a Jew. This man was not Jewish. He stopped listening. At this point, I said, don't you think it's strange that carbon is the most abundant element in the universe? And that's when he stopped listening. I was saying about listening to the opponent. You know, when you say you lose your temper. But this rest of the sentence continued. That's solid in the temperature range that water is liquid. And that is pretty amazing. Without carbon, there's no complex life. None. Zero. And it's very hard to make carbon from light beams. Hydrogen, helium, you can do that. Once you get past carbon, you can make all the others. They're all straightforward. But carbon is almost impossible to make. And that's exactly what made Hoyle become a believer, because he predicted, like the Torah predicts that there'll be change in society about 57 of that year. He predicted that there must be a certain nuance in the nuclear physics of the lead from hydrogen, helium, lithium, beryllium, boron, carbon, up to carbon, because you have to build up like Lego blocks, getting heavier, stick them together, that there must exist. He predicted it, like the Torah predicts the change in society. And we find it a change in society. And that nuance, that resonant energy was discovered. He said there's no chance that happened by chance. But now when I said, don't you think it's amazing that carbon just happens to turn out to be, because nuances in nuclear physics, the most abundant element in the universe, in which water is solid in the temperature range that water is liquid. Because if it wasn't solid, you can't make the molecules that make life. But my opponent didn't hear that. He only heard because he started answering it, he wanted to attack back. All he heard was, carbon is the most abundant element in the universe. And now he starts attacking me. after I finished speaking, but he hadn't heard the second half. He said, "How can you say that? We know that. Look at hydrogen, helium. They're vastly more. Why do you tell us that carbon's the most abundant element in the universe?" At which point, I didn't like to do it, but I did. I said, "Have you ever read the book Seven Habits of Highly?" Always listen to your opponent. What I said was, and then I told him what I said, and it was embarrassing, but it's so important because often you might be attacked when the person only gives you half or exactly what you're saying. You know, how do you use, I often do. I've walked out of sessions which I regret to this day, and some took place 15, 20 years ago, 3 times. Where I just walked out, I wouldn't take it any longer. And once I walked out, shut the door, it was an auditorium, and then I said, "This is stupid, I'm gonna go back in." But guess what? The door locked inside. I couldn't get back in. It was like a big lesson. Don't lose your cool.
All 3 times?
What?
All 3 times?
No. 3 times I walked with but one time, it was the first actually, I couldn't get back in. The first timers, questions? Yeah?
What does science believe was before the Big Bang?
Huh?
What does science believe was before the Big Bang? And then, like, what caused it? You said earlier that, like, natural forces, they, like...
Yeah, the laws of nature caused the Big Bang. That's what this diagnosis.
But there was, like, so what was there before that you just
No,
caused?
that was the whole discussion. That's exactly what, it'll take you 5 minutes and 28 seconds to watch Proof of God in 5 minutes, that video. I urge you, just watch it. It's not more than 6 minutes, 5.5 minutes. Figure half a minute to find it on Google, or just type in Proof of God, and then for 6 minute investment of time, it gives you the drink graphics, which I did have nothing to do with it.